Many of our Muslim leaders, social justice advocates, have been restricted to the Black Power movement, restricted to the civil rights movement. People are unaware of their conversion to Islam and that profound transformation that gave them a deeper insight with guidance attached to that movement. And I think it's unfair for the Muslims not to come forward and correct the narrative to make sure that they understand that Muslims have made a tremendous contribution to the civil rights and human rights struggle beyond the Black Power and the Black struggles in America. Our brother Jamil al-Amin, when he left the Black Power struggle, they really didn't get him. They was really upset that he actually, he got through the loop.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Dear brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and welcome to Islamic Oasis Live. Brothers and sisters, today is another opportunity, and not only another opportunity to discuss with the scholars and with the people of knowledge, but to discuss a very unique topic and a very unique personality. Many of you may know or may not know, Sheikh Jamil al-Amin, rahmatullah alayh, passed away a few weeks ago in prison. Sheikh Jalil has very unique history behind him. He has left an amazing legacy that we as Muslims have to know, especially the Muslims of the US and of course the Muslims in general. Muslims have always played a very unique role, brothers and sisters, in this country. But it's been by design made it in a way that we don't understand our own history here. And to be honest, many Muslims don't understand the history of Muslims in general. We know maybe the history of the forefathers of America and history of so-called nation states that have been created in the last whatever years, but we may not even know our Sahaba and our ulama. And Sheikh Jalil comes from that line as far as being a Muslim who had such an amazing impact in such a little time that he had the freedom to do what he could do. So
Sheikh Jamil.
Sheikh Jamil, sorry. And so inshallah we're going to discuss this, brothers and sisters, and we're going to discuss this with our brother Sheikh Jaaber, Sheikh Muhammad Jaaber. He was here. We've had two other discussions with him regarding the life of Malcolm X and the impact of Malcolm X, rahmatullah alayh. And so, and of course the books that he has written, and one that is about to be published, bi'iznillahi ta'ala. So, but today we wanted to focus on Sheikh Jamil al-Amin. I kept saying Jalil. I think that's why you stopped me. Oh, sorry. I didn't even realize I kept saying Jalil. I was like, I thought I was saying Jamil. Sheikh Jamil al-Amin. So inshallah, we're going to discuss few topics. His background with the Black Panthers and his incarceration, the civil rights movement, the sentencing, why the trial did not happen again. There was supposed to be a retrial for him, and then why was he targeted in general, and why no, as we said, no retrial. So to discuss all of this, Sheikh Muhammad, again, welcome back to Islamic Oasis, Sheikh.
Thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Sheikh, Sheikh Jamil passed away, rahmatullah alayhi. It's been a few weeks, and I think it's been more of the discussion of his passing has been more with the African American community. Even when I put out this, that this discussion is going to happen with you, we already started marketing this. And subhanAllah, alhamdulillah, mashallah, many people started calling and saying, Jazakallah khair for having this discussion. And also the conference that we are working on that's coming up December 25th, 26th. And we said that inshallah, that discussion will also occur on those days. So Sheikh, first of all, let's discuss Sheikh Jamil and also al-Amin rahmatullah alayh, and also why is it for the Muslims in general it's important to know him?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yes, I think it's important for the Muslims to know the role that Imam Jamil al-Amin played in the Muslim community. Unfortunately, Brother Shadazi, many of our Muslim leaders, social justice advocates have been, restricted to the Black Power movement. Have been restricted to the civil rights movement. And of course, people are unaware of their conversion to Islam and that profound transformation that gave them a deeper insight with guidance attached to that movement. And I think it's unfair for the Muslims not to come forward and correct the narrative to make sure that they understand that Muslims have made a tremendous contribution to the civil rights and human rights struggle and beyond the Black power and the Black struggles in America. So I think it's important that we as Muslims come forward and explain his Islam. And not only that, I think we need to have some context to who he was as a person. He just did not rise out of a vacuum. There's a real rich history that gave birth to that type of personality.
And what is that history, Sheikh? I mean, of course, we're talking about civil rights era. We're talking about, and of course, Malcolm X is around. You have, Nation of Islam is there. You have Sheikh. The Black Panthers came after the death of Malcolm X.
That's correct.
Right. But he was around. He saw the rise of Malcolm. Or was he too young, and was he, what do we know about him and his rise, Sheikh? And him as a person, meaning his struggles. What do we know? We know, of course, and just to follow up so you can maybe answer it together. There's a lot of discussion about Malcolm X, Sheikh. We know at least the Muslims have done, to kind of whatever justice that they could do to Malcolm X, because obviously there's not enough known. But in the case of Jalil, not even that, or Jamil al-Amin, not even that.
Well, it's still an ongoing struggle trying to claim Hajj Malik Shabazz Malcolm X from the Black nationalist narrative. From the Afrocentric community, trying to actually reinsert him back into the public as he actually was in his full development as a Muslim. So we're still going back and forth with that. And in regards to Imam Jamil al-Amin, I don't think it's that much controversy in his life. It is clear that he was a Muslim, but I just want to give some context to who he was as a person. Of course, he was born below the Mason-Dixon line, which means he was born in Jim Crow South in Louisiana, and of course in the 40s, in the 40s. So definitely he was aware of the racial climate that he was born in. And in fact, Louisiana is the hub of the civil rights movement. If you go back historically, you will find that they enforced what we call the Garner-Louisiana Act, which actually allowed students to protest peacefully inside of white restaurants and white public places that did not allow colors at that particular time. And so they forced legislation to allow them to have peaceful protests, segregationist movements in that particular area. Not only that, Dorothy May Taylor was the first African American lady to be elected to the House of Representatives in Louisiana. In the 50s, she was a civil rights activist disconnected with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. King and that movement. But you see right within that area, it was seasoned with civil rights activists. If we go back to 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, what we call the Railroad Act, separate but equal, was influenced in that particular state, when Plessy himself, who had 1/8 African ancestor in his blood, he actually could pass as white, but he actually sat in a white compartment on the train, and he had to inform the conductor that he was a colored, so that they could influence legislation to actually remove segregation in the railway. And so all of this happened in Louisiana. So I'm saying just to say that our brother Imam Jamil al-Amin came from an environment that was seasoned with social justice activists and civil rights activists to try to override the Segregation Act. So he had some background as a person. Of course, he attended the Southern University there, and he migrated north, where he joined SNCC, what you call the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Coalition in Howard University. So that's when he started his early, civil rights activism at.
So, I mean, he starts as H. Rap Brown. So who he is, and then he's. So what is he, Sheikh? He's communist in the beginning. He starts as. Is that? I mean, what attracted, especially African Americans, to communism, Sheikh? I mean, usually African Americans are very, very spiritual. When you look back and you look at, you never find, let's say, atheism in African American community. It's not a common thing. But I guess the attraction to communism must have been, is it the justice?
Well, I think, yeah. Well, I think that in the very inception of the Black Power struggle, it wasn't actually a political philosophy. I think it was more so fighting against racism and discrimination. And many of them felt that the democracy that was being portrayed by the United States of America had failed them. They felt that they couldn't find justice in the courts, even in the very democracy in which they lived in. And they saw capitalism as the apex of the democracy, and it was very crippling economically to the Black community. So they were searching for a different paradigm, a different expression. And I think that as we could look at the decolonization of Africa and in the Middle East, we know that the Russian philosophy of communism and socialism was very prevalent. They are trying to actually get those concessions. So it was a competition between the United States of America trying to insert democracy in those lands and Russia trying to insert communism. And I think that as a different, or as a dissenting position against Western dominance, socialism actually was on the table. I don't think that it was leading so much to atheism, because the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was a Christian organization that gave birth to SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Coalition. So there was actually a religious Christian foundation that was underlining the social justice and civil rights movement in America. But the Panthers themselves, was being fueled by, socialism and communism. They found refuge even when they would hijack planes, and they would be allowed to land in places like Algeria that was being, blanketed by socialism. So they felt that socialism was more embracing than what we call democracy or actually capitalism in the form of democracy at that particular time. So that was one of the choices that they was made. But they never really advocated a portfolio of communism as a rule. Okay, it was just a refuge and an alliance that they had with someone other than Western powers.
Sheikh, I guess I just want to, I'm looking at his intellectual background, Sheikh. I mean, we look at anyone we look back, especially from I don't want to emphasize just on the African American any movement in general, but I'm saying, so he goes to school, then I guess he goes to college. Sheikh, I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out, because when you look at communist, I know you're saying, let's say socialist, let's not use the word communist here, on campuses, they're not all black. So was this the attraction to communism per se, or socialism? Is it I mean, tell me how. It's just that they wanted justice and they didn't care where it's coming from. You know what I'm saying? Because at least if you look at it's not a black movement.
Mm.
I mean, if you look at Che Guevara, for instance, he's not black.
Right.
But he is, communist socialist. You look at even, you see what I'm saying? But so is he someone that is being looked up to at the time also? Were they looking at people like him in the South, in Africa, and what's happening in Russia?
Well, okay, first let's go back.
I guess I'm trying to figure out where they're getting this background from.
Let's go back to Harold Brown and H. Rap Brown. He got the title rap because he was very eloquent in speech.
Right.
Very, very.
Which is common amongst socialists in general.
So even before he actually got into the social justice movement, he was well known for his eloquence of speech and how he was able to use his words and his diction, and so he had that. So that really gave him, the spotlight and being able to articulate, the movement at that particular time. Mm-hmm. But again, Sheikh, the Black Americans was under such duress and oppression that they was looking for any non-Eurocentric ideal. They felt that, the United States of America, the very country they was born in, had failed them. You must realize that we were citizens of this country. And I grew up in a segregated society. We were citizens, but we were marginalized. We weren't given equal rights. Separate schools, separate buses, separate hotels. This was very demeaning. And now we're looking at Africa going through the colonization from the 1800s of European dominance in those lands being expelled, and the socialist support was there for them. So and we have to also realize that we were looking for allies. It wasn't so much that we articulated a political platform of socialism, but we were looking for honest allies that could lift us out of this state of oppression. And of course, there was no overt expression of racism and segregation and socialism. Like you said, there was all ethnic groups involved in that. So we felt very welcome. We felt that our voice was being heard. And going back to El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, he saw this phenomenon when he made the pilgrimage to Mecca. He saw unity among Muslims of various ethnic origins. He experienced drinking from the same vessel while performing the Hajj, the pilgrimage, when he wasn't allowed to drink from the same water fountains in America. He found himself sleeping on the same mats in the tents of Mina when he weren't allowed to sleep in hotels that were actually for whites only. So looking for allies was someone who understood our plight. Okay, and one thing we must be cognizant of is that there was a concerted effort by the United States government to prevent the Black African movement from overlapping with the Black movement in America. Okay, they spent tons of resources trying to prevent this from happening because they didn't want the influence. Because at the same time, America was trying to propagate democracy in those countries, but at the same time, they had a stain of him. A badge of shame of how they were dealing with their own citizens. So, of course, the Black Panthers and the Black movement were infiltrated by socialist regimes because they too needed allies. They too needed an inroad into America because they were about influencing the politics in America as well. So, one hand washed the other, went hand in hand. So each one was trying to take advantage of the other.
Sheikh, this is just, why don't most of those people and people like Jamil al-Amin and Malcolm X, they became Muslim here. And of course, there was influence as far as Malcolm X is concerned. The Hajj made a difference for him. But, when you look at how they were influenced by the struggles in Africa, by, anti-colonial struggles, do you think, Sheikh, that the Muslims did not make enough effort from the Muslim lands to capture that momentum that could have had even more of an impact in the West on those who were struggling and seeing in their own lands, like blacks in this country, for instance, because you can see the influences of others. But of course, at the end of the day, he became Muslim, alhamdulillah. But but we don't see that concerted effort to see what's happening in the struggle in the United States and say, let's influence that. Unless you saw something and I don't know the history.
Yeah, one can say that the Muslim world at large were not aware of the intricate political details of segregation that was going on in America. Because when we had foreign students to come to America, they were isolated from urban America, okay? And they were treated different, okay? They didn't encounter overt racism as we did as American born. So they couldn't conclude that the level of oppression was at that level until they saw, the Black Americans, the of African descent, the colors take it to the streets and began to demand their rights. I think it was the social justice, civil rights movement that actually gave rise, okay, to real rebellion in the Muslim lands. When Malcolm went to the Organization of African Unity and he spoke at that summit, he criticized the African states for not actually taking an interest of the oppression in America. And many of them was oblivious of what was actually going on. Also, you have to realize that Africa was going through turmoil. We had apartheid in South Africa, and it was actually ruled to be unconstitutional, in violation of human rights as early as in the 50s. Okay. And in fact, the ANC, the African National Congress, had to pick up, weapons to actually demand their liberation. So they was in a position where they couldn't do too much but fight for their own domestic sovereignty. And of course, and that was the state of their affairs. But as I mentioned, the government in itself spent, a lot of resources to prevent any type of collaboration or communication between the Black African struggle and the U.S. Black struggle.
Sheikh, you think the U.S., was really concerned if, till today, the connection with Africa and the Muslims here, it's not there, still not there. Unless, fine, maybe you're from Egypt or you're from North Africa, things like that. I'm not talking about immigrants here, but, still there's work that has been done to make sure that the Muslims here, especially Black African Americans, are not connected to Africa. Many still have not traveled to Africa and see what Africa is about, kind of get in touch with those lands. But is that by design to disconnect so that all that history is not, I guess to reconnect the histories of both people here?
Yes.
Is this?
Yes, when you look at this didn't start in the 60s or 70s. We're talking about in 1865. We're talking about the Emancipation Proclamation, when the people of African descent, when you emancipate or free a people, one of the main things that must occur is that you have to restore their lost property, and that lost property is their ancestral heritage, their legacy. They were not reconnected to the motherland. They were reclassified and re-identified as Negroes, which means a person who actually his birthright starts right in America. So in their orientation, in their education, many of the early people of African descent in America saw themselves as different from Africa. In fact, the images that was projected on the screen in the media about Africa made the African American ashamed to even identify with that. He was more concerned with climbing up the social ladder, and he felt that he was more privileged to be in the Western world. And we find that when we travel abroad, as when you travel abroad in the greater world, especially in the Muslim world, when you encounter people who may be indigenous to that man, they may look upon you with a level of disdain, or you may not be at the same status. But when you show them your passport and it says American, okay, they see that you're an American, that's a status. So I think that the African American felt in the early stages that being an American and not an African was a status. In fact, when you look at the social classifications, that once upon a time, the social classification of those people from the African diaspora was Negro, and there was an admixture of whites with blacks to create what we call a unique ethnic group called mulattoes, of which we classified as colors in America. And even the colors did not want to be classified as blacks. So even within the ranks of the African American community, there was a status quo there. And of course, if you look at most of our civil rights activists who came to the front line to fend for social justice, more or less was from a mulatto background. As I mentioned, Homer Plessy only had 1/8 of African ancestry in him. And we can look at Thurgood Marshall and all of the other civil rights activists, Frederick Douglass, who advocated for the abolishment of slavery. All of these was actually, for a better choice of word, biracial. So there was a status within that. And of course, in the educational system, and, I'm a student of the Western education, and I'm a historian. And I've read 4,000 pages of Western history, and never do they mention Muslims in those narratives. Never do they mention Africa as a glorious civilization in those narratives. So there's a pushback. And of course, the African people from the African continent have no concept of the struggle of oppression, because this is the only society historically that has ever experienced chattel slavery, where the human being was reduced to property, and all of his human rights were stripped from him. So when they read about slavery, they're thinking about slavery according to the Roman, the Greek, or the Egyptian standards, or within their tribal, confines, but not chattel slavery. So they have no idea of the atrocities that the people here experienced.
Subhanallah. So Sheikh, now we go back to Sheikh Jamil al-Amin. That he's arrested. I didn't know that he was arrested and he was sentenced for 5 years. This is before Islam. So he's accepted Islam in jail.
He's a very interesting individual in his early years. In fact, they have something called the H. Rap Brown Law. Okay. And that came about when he actually was in Maryland, Cambridge, Maryland, and he did a speech there. And he actually, and he always said that, violence is just as common in America as cherry pie. And he made a statement, and I'm paraphrasing, said that we built America, and if America don't come around, then we're going to burn America down. Okay. And from that statement, the people got real, radical. And of course, they began to burn some properties there. And he was cited for, and he was actually indicted for inciting a riot. And of course, that law went into effect that if you actually cross state lines to incite a riot, or if you send mail or you do it by phone, then it becomes a federal offense. So he actually was indicted for that. And of course, he didn't answer the court date, and he became a fugitive. And he still, began to advocate social justice. And the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Coalition allied with the Black Panthers for a brief period of time. And he actually became one of the ministers of justice for the Black Panthers. So now the government is really concerned. Okay, when they was looking at the civil rights movement, they were concerned that Dr. King and the likeness of Dr. King would actually embrace socialism as an alternative, because the democracy that America was actually propagating were not working. So they was monitoring Dr. King to make sure that he did not have any socialist or communist affiliates. So the Black Panthers themselves, they could not endure what we call the passive nonviolent resistance, turning the other cheek. So they reinsert themselves with a militant platform, and of course it was self-defense, but any form of resistance or even defending yourself was considered an act of violence by the powers that be at that particular time. And of course, when they viewed as when the FBI or the law enforcement agents came after you, they came with orders to shoot to kill. So it was a matter of a violent conflict. And of course, our brother at that particular time, H. Ralph Brown, he got caught up in that vein. The narrative was correct, but the method in which they pursued to bring about change was actually more damaging than it was helpful. And of course, as many of the Panthers would do, they would rob banks. They had lost all types of respect for the American society. They had lost respect for the criminal justice system, the judicial system. They saw that the highest, authority in the land was not answering their call for human rights violations. So they somewhat took the law in their own hand. And of course, he was actually captured after a shootout with the police in New York. He was injured. And of course, he was sentenced 5 to 15 years. And he went to Attica, one of the worst prisons in the history of America, who had just finished a riot with 30-some odd people were killed, and some 10, 11 correction officers killed in a hostage takeover, demanding rights, human rights to be a human being inside a prison, health care, and things of that nature. And of course, he was put in that prison 1 month after the riot, and that's where he actually embraced Islam.
Oh, well, in Attica?
In Attica, yes, New York.
He was there 5 years?
He actually did 5 years in Attica.
5 years. So Sheikh, so you
76. So
there were Muslims there in Attica jail at that time?
Oh yes, there was a lot of Muslims in there. This is one thing that we must understand that our history.
Before you go, what year are we looking at? Yeah. He's in 70 something.
Yeah, in the early 70s, 71.
Early 70s. So okay, so I mean, when you say, okay, well, interesting. Okay, so the Muslims are in jail. I mean, this is a high security jail.
Yes. Now, what this is something that's very, very unique and really, really phenomenon. When the Black Panthers were incarcerated, and they had a chance to settle down and really rethink the direction of social justice, the path in which they would take, many of them became Muslims because Islam offered them a structure. Islam offered them guidance. Islam actually made sense to the dunces they was involved with. They saw everything that they were striving for was already codified and minted inside of Islam. And of course, many of them became Muslim. And what happened is that they were Muslims inside of the prison system that was connected to Muslims on the outside. So there was a constant effort of dawah inside of the prison. Actually, when H. Ralph Brown went into the prisons, the Muslims embraced him. And they took him to Jumu'ah, and he would listen to the khutbahs, and he would sit with Muslims because the Muslims were the wisdom base inside of the prisons, And many of them was ex-Panthers. They had went through that same path that he had, and they saw it was a dead end, that they weren't getting the type of result. And of course, he began to rethink his whole life. And of course, he became a Muslim. And of course, he wanted to come out and build a moral society. He saw that the problem was inside of the human heart. It was the problem was inside of people being brainwashed and wrongly orientated, that the hate that was coming from the powers that be. And he felt that, he had to actually come out and actually enter into society as a very positive individual on the righteous side of things, and he could get more done that way. And he did that.
So subhanAllah, okay, so he's in jail. He meets with the Muslims, and many of the Muslims many who became Muslims in jail are also coming from the same background
Yes.
as him, and so people who are looking for justice, standing up for against oppression. I mean, that had to be a bit. You think the the government was thinking this is a bad idea? I mean, you're putting together all kinds of like-minded people in one place for 5 years.
Yes, I mean they would move them around when they become problematic. But it's important to understand that when we look at the life of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, there were no Black Panthers until 1966. There was no actually militant type Black movements until the assassination of Hajj Malik Shabazz. Many of the people that actually joined the Black Panthers or got involved in the militancy were actually Muslims. Okay, it's like when you're waiting for justice, when you're waiting for equality, when you're waiting for the American government to actually resolve the segregation laws, and they don't do it, their patience runs short. So a lot of them lost patience. My father, Yakumullah, he did janazas for many of the Black Panthers, okay? And they were Muslims. No one knew they were Muslims until they were killed or they lost their lives. And you would see my father come forward and he would claim their bodies and he would perform the janazah for them. And it was because they had lost hope in the American justice system. They saw a dark light or no light at all at the end of the tunnel. And of course, they were the Darul Islam, which was actually an indigenous Muslim grassroots movement in Brooklyn, New York, started from there, that evolved out of State Street Masjid, mainly because they thought that our Sheikh Dawood Faisal, Yahmallah, was not active enough, from a grassroots level to bring about, justice. So they kind of like branched off to kind of like create that platform. And they were very active in the prisons with Dawah. And it was through that organization, that movement, that Imam Jamil al-Amin accepted Islam. And of course, and I want to say this before you, and it's unique and it's something interesting because he inherited that organization later on, and we can talk about that.
Right. So he was from the first administration itself. I mean, he was right. I mean, because I was just talking to also Sheikh Abdul Karim, he was part of the whole the movement, and I think now he's the Amir of the movement. And Sheikh, so he comes out. So at that time there is no the Darul Salam movement. This was there even before NOI, Nation of Islam.
The Darul Islam movement came after the Nation of Islam. It came in the late 60s.
Okay, so they come. They come in the late 60s.
Yes.
So he becomes Muslim. He comes out
in the 70s.
But he now he's now representing Darul Salam movement at one point.
Well, yes and no. Let me just bring some clarity to that. What happened is when he came out of prison, he moved to Atlanta, Georgia, in the West End, and of course, he was an affiliate of Darul Islam, and he opened a masjid, community store. He was very civically active. He was a community activist, cleaning up the neighborhood from drugs, just doing all good things in the community. And what happened is the Darul Islam movement split in the 80s. It split in the 80s. A Pakistani sheikh by the name of Mubarak Jalani came in, and of course they moved towards a more or less a tasawwuf orientation, and it created a split within that organization. Some of them just maintained Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah without any alteration in their beliefs pattern and so forth. And of course, that again, Jamil al-Amin was, the go-through guy. He was the one that maintained the balance. And so they actually came to him to ask him to actually be the leader of the organization. But what happened is there were so many different fragmented groups of indigenous Muslim movements in various areas of the United States that they formulated what we call al-Ummah. Al-Ummah, which means the national community, which umbrella all of those organizations who actually wanted to come under his leadership. And that's how he kind of inherited that. But one thing
they created something called Al-Ummah.
Al-Ummah, yes.
This is other than Darus Salam movement. Or,
yes, it is. But it actually umbrellaed those from the Dar Islam movement who actually did not go with the Salwat platform. Okay, it kind of like galvanized them, and they came under his leadership, many of them. But there was still a degree of independent autonomy with various groups that was under the Ummah.
Okay, so a new movement comes about, basically known as Al-Ummah. He's the Amir.
Yes.
Because I saw some of the readings, Sheikh, and he seems like he even studied the idea of the caliphate. I mean, he was there. I mean, because talking to some of the brothers, Sheikh, it looks like, I mean, I don't know how far, this happened, but did they study under also Israr Ahmed? Dr. Israr Ahmed, did they?
I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of their inner circles or how they was formulating the Khilafah. But
I guess there was a discussion there.
Oh yes, there was a discussion. But what I saw is when they mentioned the Khilafah, that was actually more organization. It wasn't to spill out into the political climate in America, even though it was interpreted as that. And again,
the government interpreted that as that. Okay,
they interpreted it as a political expression, a political platform that was being developed, an anti-American platform that was being developed. But actually, it was actually to galvanize all the Muslims, to bring them under one leadership, so that they would have one voice, and of course their numbers and their solidarity would actually strengthen the community at large, and they could actually do more. But what happens is, Sheikh Muhammad,
but now this is not just the African American movement anymore.
No, it actually goes into anyone who actually wanted to align themselves. It wasn't restricted, but there were predominantly African American presence there. Now, unfortunately,
because of the neighborhood that he was growing, I know you want to get. I just want to know the details because this is very interesting, and for me, so it was a movement that was. It was not just for African Americans. So there were others who were also being part of this from day one.
Yes.
Interesting.
In the Ummah. Now, when we talk about Darul Islam, the Darul Islam movement actually was only privy for African Americans. Okay. They had one brother who actually was from Pakistan, who actually, I'm not going to call his name, we actually one of their instructors. They allowed him to be one of the instructors for the Islamic studies, the Arabic and Quran, etc. But it was actually structured for people who actually had come, through the civil rights struggle, African Americans, who actually felt that they needed to actually have their own identity, So that was what happened with that. But our brother Jamil al-Amin, he inherited bad history. Okay, bad history followed him. And what happens what I say about that is that, anytime you assume the role of a leader, everything that is attached to the organization, whether it be members, whether it be what the organization stands for, whether it be affiliations or alliance, all of that is put on the shoulder of the leader. So all of the things that people individually did, for their own volition that was not connected, was actually
put it on him. They connected it to him.
Yeah, they connected that to him. And as I mentioned, that the Black Power struggle, when he left the Black Power struggle, they really didn't get him. They was really upset that he actually, he got through the loop. Okay, now he's a Muslim. Now, as in the beginning, they was trying to prevent the Black Power movement or the Black movements in America from connecting with the Black movements in Africa. So it was a black on black type situation. Now he's a Muslim. Now they had to actually prevent the Muslims in America, and that was in the Black struggle movement, from connecting with the Muslims that was abroad. That's why they tried
Subhanallah.
to prevent El-Hajj Malik Shabazz from actually connecting to the Muslim world. Okay. So there's always been an effort. So, and there's always been a major infiltration, okay, to create or to distract people that actually have a focus. So now we have Jamil al-Amin, the leader of Al-Ummah. And of course, as I mentioned, there are other people coming in. Okay. And we have, and of course, we go back to the 70s. And we never really thought about what was going on in the 70s. We're talking about.
Okay, hold on. Before you go there, look, Sheikh, so here, and subhanAllah, this is very interesting to me because so first, you have African Americans trying to connect to homeland. That was already a problem. But let's say even if they do, it's more of a nationalistic, ethnic kind of, let's say, connection. But now they are reconnecting not just to their roots, but they're actually connecting to Islam, which is now giving them a purpose, much bigger purpose, and an actual history. So now this becomes even a bigger problem because now there's a people who have lost their purpose, who disconnected from their roots. Now they not only have their roots, but they have a purpose and a global history to connect back to.
Yes, and what I'm saying is this is second time around.
Yes,
Let me explain it.
Yes,
because before there was a Black Power movement. Before there was a civil rights movement. There was the Islamic Dawah movement in America. If you look at the early organizations that came forward with bringing a new paradigm to the so-called African American or the Negro as he was classified in the 20s and 30s, we had something, a fine destined movement called the Moorish Science Temple. Okay, even though they did not advocate the theology of Islam, but they advocated the culture and the philosophy of Islam. They actually had reconnected the people of the African diaspora to the motherland and had reconnected them to the Islamic identity that many of the slaves had come into America, not only from Africa, but the fallout from Andalusia, the Moors that came from Spain into the mainland and so forth. So before we had a Black Power struggle, we had an Islamic movement. We had the Adinullah Universal Arabic Association that was founded in 1936, chartered in 1938 by the late Professor Muhammad Izzuddin, who got his scholarship from Al-Azhar, who came back and set up an organization. And in the 40s, we were infiltrated. And we have in our presence now 617 declassified FBI files. So you see right there that Islam was actually stopped. And the movement of Islam was stopped because now we're talking about what Malcolm had actually experienced in the 60s was actually a living phenomenon in the 30s and 40s.
And so the name you mentioned, you mentioned the Sheikh's name. What's his name, Sheikh, again? I'm sorry.
Muhammad Izzuddin.
Muhammad Izzuddin. Huh.
He was this co-signer with Drew Ali on the Moorish Temple of Science in the 1920s.
So he's Azhari.
Yes, Azhari, yes. And he went in 1930. And we had Sheikh Muhammad Seti Majid from Sudan who came here in the 20s, who actually integrated with the blacks in Detroit and Chicago and New York, teaching them Sunni Islam. So I'm saying that once they was able to snuff out the Islamic movement, and they gave credence and preference to the Nation of Islam because this was one way to create a homegrown Islamic movement, or in the name of Islam, which will be a disconnect from the motherland or the Muslims abroad or the Muslim at large in the greater Muslim world. And if you study the doctrine of the Nation of Islam, they never made any contact with the Muslims abroad. It was a domestic, homegrown movement. And Malcolm broke that monotony when he went abroad. So there's always been an effort to downplay the Muslim presence. And that's why when you look at Malcolm's life, after his demise, very little is known about his Islam. But a lot of resources is poured into his Black nationalism. And we are trying to prevent this from happening with Imam Jamil al-Amin, who made a great contribution for unifying Muslims, for maintaining the course of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. But again, he inherited bad history, and everything that the Panthers did followed him, and everything that the Muslims did outside of his organization, they actually put that on him. And even in the FBI files, they said, well, we have to deem them a terrorist organization. The organization that wasn't even affiliated with him, right? The organization that split in the 80s, as I mentioned, the Fuqara, as it was called, with Sheikh Mubarak Jalani. And we have Al Ummah, which is the residue of the Dar and many other people who actually embrace Islam and accept his leadership. But as far as the FBI concerned, it was all the same. So we're all the same when you look at from a national security standpoint, we're all the same. And when they actually try to stifle the growth of Islam, they try to stop all the Muslims. So when we look at the 80s, we're talking about Jimmy Carter era. When we're talking about the hostage crisis, we're talking about the Ronald Reagan era, the bombing of Libya as a retaliation for some restaurant that was bombed. So the Muslims has always been on the siege. But the main objective here was to prevent the Muslims in America from ever connecting with the Muslims abroad, because they weren't sure as to would there be any type of domestic, revolt here. So that's been a very huge concern even to this very moment. How are the Muslims abroad interacting with the domestic Muslims in America? How much influence is actually being poured into our communities that may bring some instability in the politics in this society?
Sheikh, a bit of divergence here, just because that about another issue. Do you think what's happening in this country, as far as, and I know I asked you this before, I think in a few other shows, this idea that we have to have homegrown scholars, and we have to have people who understand this society, and only those they can give fatwa here and things like this. This is a trend that's been going on for the last 20, 30 years in this country. I mean, does this come from that history that, that if you disconnect the Muslims here from the scholars back home or from the society back home and make it almost like the Muslim community in this country is like a disconnected, unique community, belongs to only American Muslim community? You see what I'm saying? I mean, do you see a lot of similarities in how the cutoff is happening from back home? Like disconnect?
I can speak from experience. I'm 70 years old, born and raised in this country. And I've seen the trends. I've seen the trends. I'm probably aware of 90% of all the masjids that were erected from the 70s up until this point. Probably aware of all the scholars that have come into America, the imams, their roles, and so forth and so on. When we talk about having domestic scholars, that is a Department of Justice program. What I mean by that is that we know that our Islam is a perfect way of life, and it can actually be expressed in any age, at any time, under any circumstances. Islam can actually reach its perfection in any society. This is a strategy to disconnect the Muslims, to actually turn Muslims against Muslims. One thing that is unique about this country, and whether it's fair or not, is that it allows freedom of religion. And when we think about religion in the sense of a religious spiritual expression without actually a concrete application, when we look at Islam, we don't really have a word that actually means religion in the sense of an isolated practice that's separated from our secular activities. Islam is holistic. It dictates how we spend our money, how we raise our families, our dietary regulations, how we react and interact with Muslims and non-Muslims. we have, checks and balances and everything we do as a Muslim. It's a very civilized, very civic, humane way of life, and when you begin to take away certain aspects of the Muslim expression, then you begin to cripple Islam. Okay, so what happened is that we have Muslims who in certain countries are not allowed to wear the head covering. I mean, these basic fundamental rights are being violated. We have problems getting our children out of certain schools in certain states to observe religious holidays, things of this nature. We have a overwhelming harassment of Muslims in certain states and so forth, Islamophobia. So what is the pressure is being put on the Muslim for a compromise, okay, so that we can actually limit our Islamic expression to just four corners, and I call that the masjid, that Islam does not have any expression outside of the masjid, that we should be more concerned with orientating and maintaining our cultural inborn Muslims and let America decide on how Islam should spread. So the effort of dawah is being restricted when we actually break Islam up into nation states. And this is the problem we suffer throughout the Muslim world. The reason why we don't have the cohesion that we need as Muslims and the solidarity is because, we not only do we have nation states, but we're ethnically divided. And they are trying to get this type of portfolio into the Muslims here. Scholarship is scholarship. When you talk about what is a Western scholarship in Islam versus an Eastern scholarship in Islam, it's the same. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, was given only one book, and that one book was capable of raising to the level of a civilization. You see, and it's not like they don't know, the perfection of Islam. It's that the democracy in which we live in, they are promoting it as the supreme political paradigm for humanity, and they don't want anyone to look at the perfection of Islam. America is 500 years behind in their politics and their justice system and how they interact with diversity of ethnicities and different people and social and economical status, what the Quran has laid it out. And they have studied this. It was through our efforts that brought Europe out of the Dark Ages into the Renaissance. And one author wrote, and I can't remember his name, he said that upon the fall of Andalusia, we began to live our lives. We began to come into the modern world. So Islam is in its values and its principles, as anyone who studied Islam, it has a religious, moral foundation, that 95% of humanity would agree to, even if you strip the name from it. So it's the fear that Islam could, in fact, be a replacement for capitalism in the guise of democracy. And I think that's the great fear of saying we need to bring in homegrown scholars. I see that as a compromise. I have seen how the moral fabric of Islam has been eroded over the years, that we begin to embrace state-sanctioned holidays like Thanksgiving, Halloween, and now Christmas. And we are actually teaching our children that your religion, we're still stuck on lakum dinukum waliyadin. You have your religion and I have my religion, not knowing that has been abrogated. وَمَن يَبْتَغِي بِغَيْرِ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ وَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sanctioned Islam as the governance for the Muslim wherever we be in the world. So we're not in a position to compromise what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed. Of course, we have to realize that we are not in a Muslim society. So the only thing that we are obligated here in America is to call people to Islam. Islam is not a political outrage or revolt, and that's one thing that the Black nationalist movement realized, that Islam is not a Black revolt against the American society. It is an invitation for all the sons and daughters of Adam to come in and embrace this illustrious lifestyle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed for his own creation. And that is the fear.
SubhanAllah. Sheikh, so now his conversion to Islam, he's now an Imam. But Sheikh, I mean, his impact is amazing. Talk to me about his impact, Sheikh. I mean, almost, so he's almost become a national figure.
Yes.
At one point. I mean, does that also bring in fear that type of influence that he has?
Of course, as I mentioned earlier, you inherit bad history, but you also inherit good history. Many of us remember the good that he was doing. Many of us see him as iconic, as a symbol of strength, of integrity and honesty and fairness, and willing to stand up for what that which is right. So when he actually entered into the arena of Islam, that good history, okay, that bedrock that he had laid down of being a person of strength and resilience, a lot of people began to embrace Islam because if H. Rap Brown, the person who was actually in the front line saying if America don't come around, we will burn America down. He said violence is just as common in America as cherry pie. To see someone like that who humbled himself to a power greater than his own, to a reasoning greater than his own, to a way of life that supersedes what he thought was the answer. Then they said there gotta be something in that in Islam. So he was like the gatekeeper. And of course, and again, that rage that he had for justice was channeled. And he understood, now he had a different methodology of bringing truth to exposing injustice. But this time he was doing it through divine guidance from the Quran, from the legislative dictates of our beloved messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I always say that Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, is the best kept secret from humanity. Okay. They made a great effort to conceal the identity of Muhammad as a moral physician. You say, beyond being the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but as a moral physician, as a champion of justice, as a champion of human rights for the downtrodden and the rejected, the orphans, the women, to see that personality come to the forefront. And they are rewriting his history with the exclusion of his name 1,400 years later. So that is the great fear. So that good history followed Jamil al-Amin. And he became an imam by consensus, not necessarily because of his Islamic scholarship. Okay?
Yeah,
always
Yes, he's new to Islam, but subhanAllah, he's an imam.
Yes, and we see the thing that I experienced, Sheikh Shazi, is that we were able to do more with Surah Al-Fatiha and the 4 core surahs. We was able to do more with Mishkat al-Mahsabi, the hadith book. We was able to do more with just the arkan, the very fundamental 5 pillars of Islam and the articles of faith, being solidified with brotherhood. Okay, that unity and love and concern with one another moved us forward as a community. We were beyond just a masjid where we have to drive 20 miles to make the Fajr and back home. That we tried to build communities that was right within our doorway, that we can walk to the community, that we can interact on a day-to-day basis with our brothers and sisters so that we would cease to be strangers amongst each other. So when he say he became the imam, he became a beacon of light. He became iconic for leadership and brotherhood and solidarity. And that's what is lacking today. Even though we have the scholarship and we have the illustrious masjids and we have all of these elaborate, embellished, communities, but the level of love and brotherhood and solidarity among the Muslims seems to not be as strong as it was when we were in the 70s and 80s.
Huh. SubhanAllah, Sheikh. I mean, this is profound. I mean, you said we were able to do more with Surah Al-Fatiha and the Quls. I mean, today we have madaris who are teaching thousands of students and we can't stand up for nothing. So, Sheikh, you said he became imam by consensus because of his work.
Yes.
So
Yes, I mean,
he shows up on the map, and then he starts changing from day one, changing people, changing community, having that impact.
and that's why I always say a transition, a transformation, because we know that in Islam, the good, even if you are operating without guidance, what we call in the state of Jahiliyyah, but the good that you acquire, the good deeds that you acquire in that state out of sincerity is transferred over. That's added to your skills. So people saw that silver lining of genuineness in him. Okay. And of course, when you look at the social justice struggle, when we read the Quran and the life of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you almost feel that he's addressing your condition at that particular time, 1440 some years ago, that he's addressing the downtrodden. So Islam was it was the answer. It was a solution. It was a salvation. Wherein in the churches, the churches were segregated. I mean, and I grew up in Jim Crow South. I mean, you have black churches and white churches, and they're supposed to be worshiping in the same faith. But we didn't find that in Islam. And you go back to the early presence, as I mentioned, that we had an Islamic movement before we had a Black Power movement. And that is, when I say Islamic in the true sense of the word, it was diverse. Okay, that it was a brotherhood that embraced each and everyone who wanted to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Colorism and racism was limited into the individual, but it did not have any expression within that space. So Islam
But Sheikh,
actually,
today we're looking at masajid. I mean, really, Sheikh, it's a sad situation where you have masajid that belong to the Arabs and to the so-called, Desis and African American masajid. I mean, are we doing is this a type of segregation by itself?
It's a form of segregation, but I call it nationalism. And the Prophet ﷺ, he told us to leave Muntana. It is something that's putrid, that is foul, and unfortunately, what we are doing in America, Sheikh, is that we are replicating what's abroad. If you look at the Muslim world, we are identified by statehood.
Yeah.
For example, if I see a brother, he said, our nationalities have become our identities. We have racialized our nationalities. I'm an Egyptian. I'm a Sudanese. I'm a Moroccan. I'm a Pakistani. I'm an Indian. I'm a Singali. I'm Indonesian. So our Islam is secondary. Okay. And we are more concerned about your origin than your faith. And where you're from dictates how I interact with you. And we have, and unfortunately, we even have refugees who have come recently to America within the last 30 years who have not or yet to assimilate with the existing Muslim community. And I say this because we've been on the front line since the 30s. And we see masjids, being erected right in our backyard, right in our back door, without the interest of assimilating and fortifying that which is already established, and pooling our resources so that we can maximize our efforts as Muslims. So when we replicate, okay, we got 6 masjids within this 5-mile radius, and each masjid is ethnically different. That doesn't speak good for Islam. And of course, that reinforces the idea of segregation in America. And so this is something that America would champion, divide and conquer. Well, we don't have to do anything. We don't have to infiltrate because they're already divided. So we need to actually revisit that and say, where is the leadership? And that's what we lack. When we had people like Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, we had leadership. We had people like Sheikh Muhammad Izzuddin. We had leadership. Sheikh Dawood Faisal. We didn't have 10 masjids in Brooklyn. Everybody went to State Street.
But Sheikh, do you think that if we had Malcolm X type today, another Malcolm X comes around, I mean, all it takes is one more Malcolm X, but let's say if he does, you think the Muslim community is ready for Malcolm X?
I would say that once upon a time, I would say yes. But I think at this point, and in my efforts of da'wah, my engagement and interaction with the Muslim community, we are against unity. We are afraid to come together in large numbers, except to pray the Eid Salah. We can do nothing collectively. Okay, we cannot do things by committee. Except we come together for the Salat of Eid, or we may come together at a conference. And most of the people that are paneled on the conference are so far remote that we only know them through the social media networks like the internet. And we go as though we are going to a grand finale to hear celebrities talk about Islam. So, of course, if someone like a person like Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz came today, he would be actually pushed back as the civil rights Christians push back the Muslims, you see, because we are so invested in the corruption, in the politics of America, that we are afraid to be exposed. As I mentioned, I've been around for a while, and of course, they have agendas. Most of our communities are not ran by imams; they're ran by administrative boards. Our imams are actually clerics. They come in to actually perform a designated, what we call chore, a duty. They don't have any real influence, and I think that's what's lacking in the community. People have influence, and I'm not talking about influence without substance. I'm talking about influence that can direct you back to the path in which you should be on. And I'm not saying that we have to be under one umbrella, but we have to still have a one agenda, and we have to have one agenda. And of course, that agenda, above and beyond anything else, is to invite people to Islam and to remove this stigma, as the West want people to think that Muslims are anti-American. Muslims want to destroy America. Muslims want to kill non-believers. This is the scare tactic that to their advantage. And we have not put enough work or enough resources to counter that. How much money we spend in the dawah? Most of the da'is or those who are propagating Islam are using their own personal income to actually go out and propagate Islam. We don't have the resources for social media, for TV broadcasts, to actually get on the universities circuits to talk about Islam, to really have a visibility about we always allow the media to attack us without having the apparatus to counteract that. And that's actually putting us at a disadvantage. And that is giving the disbelievers the advantage point to downplay Islam, to make it as something that is strange to the American society.
So, Sheikh, subhanAllah, there's a lot that you said there, but Jamil al-Amin, Sheikh Jamil, he passed away, and even while he was in prison, Sheikh, there were very few people really that were advocating for him.
Yes.
I spoke to one brother today. He said, man, I used to speak to him at least twice a week. But still, who knows him, Sheikh? Other than those who maybe 70s, 80s, 90s. But let's go back a little bit again, Sheikh. So he becomes Muslim. He has an impact. He's changing the community. He's having that, the good history is coming with him. But then he's incarcerated again. And that was the last time he was arrested, it seems. Once he was taken back in again. They put it seems to be some type of a stop at and then something. The idea that they were looking for anything that they could put on him. But what was it, Sheikh? They said they put something that he was trying to. There was killing of a cop involved, and something like this. So what exactly happened, Sheikh?
Now, okay, two things. First, Imam Jamil al-Amin, I view him as a family. He knew my father. And of course, my father was a mentor for him. My father was a mentor for a lot of the Muslims. I told you, my father's been around since the 50s. okay, of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. You know, he's a recipient of the oldest organization. Um, so my father was a mentor for Jamil al-Amin, and the first time I met him was with my father. And also, I had the opportunity and the privilege to study with him in 1978, and when we was getting our ijazah. So he does have a legitimate Islamic educational background. Also, when I visited him in Atlanta, I slept in his house, and I would drive to Atlanta to attend the Eid in Atlanta. So I knew him very well, and I was amazed because I was a youngster, and his reputation, really just kind of like inspired me, And these are the type of people we looked up to, someone who had strength and resilience. Unfortunately, the circumstance that happened around his last arrest, we was in the hype of the war on terror, 9/11. A lot of the organizations were actually pulling the plug on their organization that was going incognito. They didn't want to be seen in the public space. And of course, as you know, unofficially, Jamil al-Amin organization was considered by, people that was suffering from Islamophobia or whatever, said it's a terrorist organization. And they really didn't know how to evaluate that. There was not enough information given to the public as to say what happened. And, anyone who knew our Imam Jamil al-Amin knew that didn't happen. Whatever the criminal justice was saying, whether the district attorney office was saying about him, knowing that personality, we knew whatever they were saying about him, that didn't happen. It was something else. Okay. And one thing that is, I think happened is that Jamil al-Amin, our Imam, was doing such positive work and stand on the righteous side of things that it aggravated, the law enforcement. They were looking to get him in a trap. As I said, the other organization, the Fuqara, was under investigation by the FBI. They were deemed in 1990s, the late 90s, to be a terrorist organization. But Jamil al-Amin was not associated with that organization. But the fact that there was domestic Muslims, people that had, run-ins with law enforcement officers that happened to be Muslim, or whatever situation, whatever the case may be, they attached that to him. So all the bad history was on his shoulders. So now, with this incident, we're talking about a minor traffic citation, failure to appear in court, 2 deputies going to serve a bench warrant, and the outcome of that is unbelievable, and all the evidence that's in his favor were prevented him from a retrial, and anyone who's actually been involved in things like that, know that once they trap you, they use all their resources to actually silence you. Jamil al-Amin was a very, very profound person. He meant a lot to the Muslim community. He meant a lot to all of us for solidarity, for balance, being an indigenous Muslim who went through all of the social justice struggle, the Black Panther movement, the Black Power movement. And at the end of his road, he's a Muslim. Okay. And of course, we're looking at, the rebirth of a personality like that of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, so they didn't want that, they didn't want that. And he had just released his book, Revolution by the book. I mean, these things are very positive expressions from a Muslim perspective, and if you read the book, you will see that he's referencing the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. He had no personally invested interest of terrorist acts to overthrow anyone. He was just a civil servant, worshiping Allah, trying to bring the Muslims together. And of course, that incident that happened, I cannot understand for the likeness why he wasn't given a retrial. Of course, they know that if a retrial would have been put on the table, they would have to have exonerated him. And of course, that would have actually elevated him in the society. And of course, they didn't want that to happen. And of course, we're really pulling back or saying anything about those intricate details concerning his trial, because we as Muslims are going to continue to work diligently to get him exonerated, to really get someone in the Justice Department, in the court system, to really revisit his case, and to actually pardon that man of all false charges. It is obvious. We have people that have come forward that their testimonies weren't even allowed in court. We even have a person who confessed to the crime, and they did not allow his testimony to enter the court. So again, we just look at it as one of those traditional entrapments of people who actually meant a lot to us, who actually escaped the atrocities of being gunned down by police in the Black Panthers, a person who escaped those atrocities of being incarcerated for what they consider hideous crime in those movements. And he came out as a Muslim, and that was the only recourse that they had. And of course, they use it to the maximum to actually indict him, to convict him, to give him life without possible parole. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give our brother, the highest paradise. And of course, that type of oppression, we ask Allah to count him among the martyrs of the believers. Ameen.
Ameen. Allahumma ameen. Sheikh, last question here. Today, Sheikh, now when we look at, let's look at what's happening in this country now. You have, racism in especially you look at what's happening with Somali community, being called garbage on national TV. Literally garbage. He says this is garbage coming in. And Sheikh, is this, Sheikh, why such hatred for, black people? What is it? Can it really? I want to really understand this. Of course, color in general. Because
let me address that. Let's do a roll call, and I'm going to come to that. We go back and we look at the civil rights movement. The NAACP was one of the organizations that spearheaded the civil rights movement, and one of the regional secretaries in was Medgar Evers. Okay, Medgar Evers. He was in Alabama. No, I'm sorry, he was in Mississippi. Medgar Evers, and of course, we know about Emmett Till, who was actually murdered by racist whites in the South. And, he was actually investigating that case. He was investigating that case. And of course, and he was open. He was actually getting witnesses to come forward to actually resolve the murder of Emmett Till. Emmett Till was from Chicago, and he was actually in Mississippi when he was killed. And of course, that led up to Medgar Evers being assassinated. Look at Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was a champion of Pan-Africanism and trying to empower, the Black race in America at that particular time. He was indicted for mail fraud, and he was actually incarcerated in the federal penitentiary, and he was actually deported back to Jamaica and died on house arrest. We're talking about Haj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X. He was infiltrated. We saw he was assassinated. Dr. King. What I'm saying is to say that that these verdicts, okay, once you have a verdict that you have to be removed by any means necessary, they take these stance. Now, when we look at the situation of the Somalian community and those derogatory statements being made by, heads of state and the highest authority in the society, these are dress rehearsed just to show you how disconnected we are as a people. That they have the audacity to separate, people from the African continent because the people of the African continent have separated themselves. So this just to let the people know that regardless of continental affinity or racial affinity, these people are divided. If we can say this about the Somalians and we get no response, then we can say this about the people of Nigeria. We can say this about the people of Morocco. We can say this about, and we've demonstrated this with the people of Afghanistan and Iraq, that we can do whatever we want to with no response from the Muslims. Okay? And now we're into colorism because now it's showing you that the blacks in America is not connected with the blacks in Africa. What kind of response are we going to get?
Chef, do they? This is interesting.
Yeah, even with the situation of Palestine, that the overt genocide, the mass genocides is being led towards men, women, and children, and civilian non-combatants, and there's no response. We have humanitarian aid, where we're actually taking band-aids in to bandage up the wounded, but there's no real preventive measures. So it's just and when we see the statement about the Somalian Sheikh, it's just another statement to demonstrate to the global community that the Africans are not united, the Muslims are not united. You see what I'm saying? And they are ethnically, racially, and divided on all levels. And they can just come in and do whatever they want. But at some point, we have to actually bring a cease to this. And really, we have to evaluate our own selves. What is the level of our strength that someone will have the audacity and without the fear of reprisal, they can come forth and say that, And this just says, it speaks to the Muslims. And we have to stop being reactionary. When things happen, we want to respond. We have to be preventive. We have to be preventive. And if we solidify our ranks and we get on the same page with a comprehensive agenda, then these things will never happen.
Subhanallah, Sheikh. Yani this is I know I said that was the last question. This is the last question. Sheikh, now Jamil al-Amin, what's the legacy, Sheikh? The final word here. I mean, legacy in a sense that, one second. Legacy in a sense that the time that we are living in across the Muslim lands, there is a type of, there is an awakening that's happening. There is an awakening. Gaza created an awakening. No matter what, I think it created amongst the Muslims a kind of, a kind of awakening. This is unbelievable what's happening in front of our eyes. So, and now with Imam Jamil.
When you mentioned that, I think right now is that the Muslim community at large, we are regretful. We are regretful to a great extent. I remember when he was incarcerated and charged with those felonious accusations, those crimes. And I was the imam at the masjid in New Jersey. And we immediately began to raise funds for his defense. And we got so much pushback. You wouldn't believe that Muslims were skeptical about his position. And again, why? Because we have a tendency to still connect the Black power struggle and the attitude of those, the militancy that was prevalent in those movements to Islam. So they weren't looking at, because most of them didn't know Imam Jamil al-Amin. They didn't know him through his transformation, as he reinvented himself, with guidance now. So when it came to him, proclaiming his innocence, they was very doubtful as to believe in it, because they knew what he was capable of doing when he was in those movements. And I think that's something that's a burden on us. And now we see with all the evidence, craving his innocence, and we did nothing because we was afraid that we would lose status. Maybe we would have been deported. Maybe our organization would have went under investigation or scrutiny. Maybe there was been some monetary improprieties that was going on that they could have come in and clamp us down. I mean, there was a fear factor there to even identify with Imam Jamil al-Amin, and of course, as Muslims, and even in America, every man, every person that is charged is innocent until proven guilty. But we dropped the ball before he even got to the court. He needed resources. He needed expertise. He needed people to come forward to testify on his behalf. Not someone to come in at the end of his sentence and plead mercy to spare his life and not to give this innocent man the death penalty. No, we needed people on, preemptive. And I think, we are right now, we bear the badge of shame for not actually coming forth and standing with our brother as he has stood for us, in the 60s, as he has stood for us in the 70s, all the way up until his demise. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him Jannah. We did not stand for our brother. When I say we, there was a few brothers who risked their all, who came forward, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward these brothers. But for the Muslim community to come together on one page for the justice of our Imam, and I don't want people to slide through the cracks now and say, well, I spoke out on his behalf because of his medical situation. Yes, we can come forward and say, give Jamil al-Amin some medical attention. He's being held in solitary confinement, sensory deprivation, which is unhealthy. These are things inside, but you're still not advocating for his innocence. The same way we can say, well, let us send water to Gaza. Let us send food to Gaza. Let us send medical supplies to Gaza. But that doesn't say anything for stopping the onslaught. So where do we stand with Jamil al-Amin? That is, we have to stand for his innocence. We have to work diligently with his family, and whatever resources they need, we have to provide it for them.
So his family is there. His family is in, where are they, Sheikh? They're in Atlanta or they're in New York?
Well, they're more based in Atlanta, and there are some supporters for him in Florida as well.
MashaAllah.
There are people, and again, the community have not abandoned him in the sense of individual connection with who knew him. I'm saying that the infrastructure of our organized Muslim community, who could have made a difference, when I look at Black Lives Matter, and I see people who are going, by the thousands to the streets, demanding justice, demanding justice, putting so much political pressure on the government, and they're doing it for Black Lives Matter, and here we are Muslims, So Muslims, we can't move from a safe zone to go out and if you look at the first battle that the Muslim engaged with the Romans was the Battle of Yarmouk. And that's because the messenger which the Prophet ﷺ sent was slaughtered. So it was actually a response to injustice that was applied to one of the believers. And one life is sacred. It don't have to be 100 people or 1,000 or 10,000 people for the Muslims to react. We have to react for one life. One life is sacred because Allah says if you save one life, the reward is you save all humanity. And you take one life unjust, then this is you're taking the life of all humanity. So the sanctity of life should be on the table. There should be a paramount. And of course, I hope that his passing will be a wake up call for the Muslims. And my father used to always say that once you're on the list, you have a choice. They're going to either kill you lying down or they're going to kill you standing up. So what choice you going to make? You're going to die standing on your feet or you're going to die lying down? At the end of the day, they have their agenda, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect the belief. And
Ameen. Allahumma ameen, Sheikh. Let's end with that, Sheikh. This is, that's enough of a statement for Muslims to realize what has happened. There is a cat here. And she is deaf, but we'll take that part out, inshallah. All right, Sheikh, inshallah, jazakallah khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your efforts, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give our brother Sheikh Jamil al-Amin. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him the highest place in Jannah, Sheikh. Wallahi, I'm actually sad that I'm discussing this now, in some ways very late, to be very honest. But he's left a legacy, Sheikh. I think, some people, they become even more important after they pass. And I think he's one of those people. People will remember him, inshallah, till the day of judgment, and they will. He's left a legacy of struggle that and strength that this ummah really, really needs so badly. I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Let me give you a hashtag on before you close out, Sheikh. Unfortunately, with our history in America, under racial oppression, discrimination, our response has been justified, and we've made great achievements in the legal system. We have actually changed legislation in this country through our coming out. Through our being very courageous and steadfast in what we are doing, and we still have a lot of work to do because systemic racism is still in our society, in our culture. And a lot of times, when our brothers and sisters come from distant lands, they see our fight as a different fight. And they see getting involved, sometimes we're looked upon as troublemakers. They say, you have to distance yourself from the Black American Muslims or the indigenous Muslims in America because you may get, in their, you get involved in their movement, and you may end up being deported, or you may end up in trouble. So we're looked at as troublemakers when we actually cry out for justice, But again, if they don't join and stand for justice, then eventually they're going to be victimized. And we see this today.
There you go. We're seeing it today. Yeah.
Yes, we're seeing it. So
you cannot survive in a cocoon, Sheikh. We just can't.
You can't. So you may be in a safe haven today, but maybe tomorrow, or next year, or 10 years down the road, you may be, identified as subversive, a dissident, and you look what happened to the Latino community. There was floodgates open before the Trump administration. The migrants were coming in by their herds, by the groves, and now there's a concerted effort to actually detain and deport them. So tomorrow may be a different theater for the Muslim. So, but one thing that I can assure you, if we all hold on to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and stay united and do not divide amongst ourselves, then Allah will give us success. Ameen.
Ameen. Allahumma ameen. And with this, Sheikh, Jazakallah khair again for your efforts. And we'll see you very soon in about 2 weeks here, December 25th and 26th, for the conference from Bilal to Malcolm, inshallah, Rabbil Alameen. And brothers and sisters, those who are watching, again, we'll have the Sheikh is here, Sheikh Ali Jaaber will be here, Sheikh Abdul Kareem, many prominent and subhanAllah, very the pillars of da'wah in this country. They will be here 25th, 26th at Islamic Oasis in Chicago. Please come and join us, and we'll be able to meet with the Sheikh one-on-one and discuss many things that we as Muslims need to learn, we need to understand, and we need to plan, inshallah, as Muslims, to where are we going, what's going to happen to us, and what is our purpose in this country, and many issues that need to be discussed with our scholars, with our teachers, with our subhanallah, with people such as with Sheikh Muhammad Jaaber. Jazakumullah khairan for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.